welcome everyone to the room. Everybody, thank you so much for making time to join me today. Really appreciate your interest in this topic. It's an important topic to me, and I'm sure it's an important topic to all of you. So thank you very much for being here. Again, my name is Anthony Ogden, and for the next hour, we're going to be talking about building a career in international higher education, and the subtitle would be Navigating this Profession. I'm joined today by my friend and colleague, Dr. Kathy Winnie. Kathy is going to be the gadfly in the room to keep me honest today. She's going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. And then toward the end, she's going to facilitate the Q&A. So let me welcome Kathy. Kathy, do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone from Dallas. It's good to see you all.
Thank you, Kathy, for being here. And Dr. Winnie has, like me, she has had a long and successful career in international higher education. I'm glad to have her joining the webinar today. Thank you, Kathy. Let me go ahead and take just a moment to introduce myself a little bit more and to tell you a little bit about why I'm doing this session. I consider myself, for better or for worse, a scholar practitioner of international higher education. And in my, I would say in the past few years, I have been fortunately receiving several calls and emails almost weekly by colleagues asking about how they can get started in this career of international education, or how they can continue to build momentum in their professional career. And so I thought it might be just very helpful to take a little bit of time out and to share some views that I might have, and then to also provide a space for you folks to ask questions and make comments. I would invite you to do that. In fact, we do have the chat enabled, so feel free to take a second to introduce yourself, maybe provide your name and where in the world you are located. Also, we have the Q&A function if you'd like to submit any questions or comments there as well. Kathy and my colleagues from Gateway International Group will be monitoring the chat. So anyhow, a little bit about me. I've been working in this space for, in fact, my entire career since I was quite young. That's been now nearly 35 years working professionally. I have earned a master's degree and a PhD in international education, particularly international and comparative higher education policy. I do maintain, and hence the word scholar practitioner, I do maintain a rather active research agenda focused on higher education, specifically on international learning and engagement. And in fact, I wasn't planning to do this, but I do have here at my desk a copy of my latest edited book with my colleagues at the Spanish Institute for Global Education on looking at language learning and education abroad. This is a really terrific edited volume published by our friends at the Star Scholars Press. Anyhow, I've held leadership roles both abroad and here in the United States at IES Tokyo, Penn State University, University of Kentucky, Michigan State, and the University of Wyoming. And I'm very proud to have had those experiences that have informed and have shaped my career. And as you'll see on the top right of the screen here, this Gateway logo, I am the founder and managing director of Gateway International Group. And so with that, and by the way, apparently I just can't grow hair even when I was younger or to today. I see that picture of me there on the screen. Anyhow, just a little bit about Gateway, 10 seconds here. Maybe some of you, in fact, I guess all of you, by the fact that you're here, have heard of Gateway, but I would like to invite you to take a look at the website. Later on in our discussion today, I will be sharing some free resources to everyone here about, career resources, really, that might be helpful to all of you. But do take a moment to look at the website, and you'll see that we are a global consultancy. We work with institutions and organizations all around the world, and quite frankly, in the space of international higher education. And with that, I see that we do have folks here from all around the world. I see Daniel coming in from Ghana and folks all around the country as well. So thank you all for being here. Looks like we have Elizabeth from Belgium. Appreciate that. Okay, so here's the plan for today. I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about navigating the profession, mentioning a little bit about career pathways, then focus a little bit on the current hiring trends. And then I will focus on 10 tips, or 10 very simple tips, really, on building a career in international education. Then I'll finish up with some resources for job seekers as well as employers. And then we'll have plenty of time for question and answers. And as I said, my colleagues from Gateway as well as Dr. Winnie are here monitoring the chat and the Q&A. So if you have questions along the way that are really pressing, make sure you put those questions in there so she can bring those to my attention. Okay, let's jump. Oh, and maybe I'll just also add that because we have folks joining us from around the world, that today in my comments, and more because of time, really, I'm focusing primarily on international higher education in a US context. So for what it's worth, do keep that in mind. So the real first question that we have to ask, and hence the title of the webinar today, is navigating the profession. So is international education indeed a profession? And what does a career in international education look like? So that's an important question for us all to ponder for a moment. For me, the first question, well, if you think about why it may be a profession, if you see here on the screen, well, we do have recognized domains of practice now, like most professions would. We have education abroad professionals, international student and scholar service professionals, international enrollment management professionals, and so on. We now have, thanks to our friends over at NAFSA, we do have generally a widely accepted set of professional competencies and standards for international education professionals. We also have our professional associations. NAFSA, AIA, and the Forum on Education Abroad, and many others provide that professional networking that's very important to all of us as professionals. And then also we have seen, and there are rather, a number of graduate degree programs focused on international education. And because of that, in part, we have a growing community of scholars focusing on international education. Now, on the flip side of that, why it might not feel like a profession, and that is because we really don't have yet a single credential or a qualification that defines entry into this profession. Now, we do see some certifications that are happening, that are being offered through our various associations, and that's very important. But yet we do not see a very clear or linear entryway into this profession. And in fact, it's quite nonlinear and often opaque. And in many ways, we all know that hiring in higher education, but specifically in international higher education, is still heavily relationship driven and very much network driven. And so later on today, I'll talk about the importance of navigating those relationships and those networks. There's also, we see roles vary widely across institutions, meaning we may see some titles that don't mean the same thing at a different institution, even though the titles are the same. So there's a lot of reasons still to think why it doesn't feel like a profession. But for me, I think it is a profession, but one that we each have to construct intentionally rather than pursue through a single defined pathway. So with that in mind, to think about navigating this profession, to keep these things in mind as we go forward. And fortunately, I think we are very much moving every day more strongly toward becoming a recognized profession. But for today, I think it goes without saying that this profession of international education is very clearly still very clearly an ecosystem. So if you look here on the screen, you'll see that we have many of us will think, oh, international educators, they work at colleges and universities here in the United States. And that's true. A large majority of international educators, at least in a US context, are working at institutions. But there are many international educators that are working in this broader ecosystem. There are international educators working at NGOs and foundations. There are international educators at government and policy bodies, And then, of course, we know many of the international student recruitment agents and organizations that work with recruiting and retaining international students here, for example, in the United States. There's also a great many education abroad providers and other organizations that are supporting education abroad. And then the list goes on and on, but technology companies, law firms, insurance companies, housing providers, the list goes on and on. So it is really important, especially for those of you who are joining us today that are job seekers in this space, that don't feel that you have to draw or pay attention exclusively over to colleges and universities, because this ecosystem is broad and it's becoming, I think, more specialized every day. And what I mean by that is here, for example, if you look at NAFSA, they developed, this is quite a few years ago now, knowledge communities that people feel affinity toward a particular knowledge community. For me, for example, my career initially started, and a lot of folks may not know this about me, but I started my career in international enrollment management. I actually worked with an agent that sent Japanese students to study and learn abroad. Then later on, I shifted my focus to education abroad, and there I stayed for quite a few years and felt that education abroad was my home knowledge community. And I was more and more an education abroad professional. But then again, I shifted toward international education leadership as an SIO. And then at the same time, I started continuing rather to build my focus on teaching, learning, and scholarship. Now, I've overseen ISSS offices and I've married a DSO, but that is one knowledge community that I know a little bit less about personally or professionally here. But these knowledge communities are very important to understand, and I would invite you to visit the NAFSA webpage to learn about them if you're not already familiar about those knowledge communities. Just to point to you to a couple of immediate references or resources that may be helpful for you, Gateway has developed a guide, if you will. It's a website called Getting Oriented as an International Educator. So some of the content that I've provided already today is sort of nicely organized there for you. If you're relatively new to this profession, then that would be a good place for you to look to try to figure out who's who, what's what, how are things structured. And next to that, you see there's an International Education Professional Resource Guide. This is also somewhat similar to the Getting Oriented guide, but they help you to get a better sense of this profession as we know it and as it's evolving. I see my colleague has pasted in some websites to these resources there in the chat. I'd encourage you to look at those, including the book here by my friends Sora Friedman and Amir Reza, Careers in International Education. I believe that's a NAFSA publication. There are other resources to look at. Of course, the ones on the middle parts of your screen are free, but that book there is a really good one, and I have it myself. Okay, let me turn my attention now to career pathways. And I'll slow down here. For essentially, education, international education in the United States in its more contemporary place really started after World War II. And there for the longest period of time, most people who considered themselves working in international education would see themselves more as generalists. Many people were working in one-person offices, you might remember that terminology, where they had broad roles and assignments. So they were doing just a little bit of everything, working with international students, working with education abroad, working on partnerships and collaborations and so forth. Those generalists still exist, and there are still many one-person offices. That has not gone away. And arguably, some people might say we are moving back toward that, but I'm not so sure about that. Instead, what I think is over the last maybe 20 years, we've seen a really rapid movement towards specialists. And these are those specialist functions that are now very clear. So you'll see people say, that, well, if you go to a university, for example, you'll see there's an education abroad office, or there's an ISSS office, or there's other types of offices related to international education. Many of these offices, many of these specialists are very compliance trained, and they're experts in particular areas from data and so on. Now, if you just look to the right side of your screen there, I put just an example of that specialization that's happened. For example, if you go in an education abroad setting now, you'll see people who are just focusing on IT and data, or others that are focusing on marketing and communications. In fact, there's a whole sub community of people. In fact, I believe there's a network. I don't actually remember the name of that network right now. Maybe somebody does and can put that in the chat. But there's a marketing and communications network. There's a health, safety, and security network. In fact, I do know about that one. That's called Pulse, among others, OSAC and others, where there's education abroad professionals that are specialists in health, safety, security, and risk management. And then there's also a network of financial management folks. The point being is international education, as we know it, has moved broadly from generalists to specialists. And if you look at this in a slightly different way, there used to be a time when I was starting out, for example, that there were really only 3 layers in an international office, particularly at a university, where there were advisors, and then there were assistant directors, and then there were directors. And if you really, because if you see it in the pyramid shape, if you really wanted to move into a higher role, most often people had to leave their institution and go to another one, or they could sit and wait for somebody to retire and move on above them. But that was generally the pattern. People had to move quite frequently in order to get promoted within their institution. That still happens, of course, but that pyramid is not so clear. So to repeat what I was saying earlier, this to the right side of your screen is a bit of a simplistic look at an office now. So for example, you would have a chief international officer, or what we typically use in the United States, a senior international officer, and that would be the primary lead. There would then be direct reports under that person. And for example, a director of education abroad, or a director of international student and scholar services, and so on. Now, within that, below those folks, you would see, again, greater specialization happening. Now, there are SIOs that report mostly to the academic officer, or the provost, or the chief academic officer. That's typically the more mainstream, because international education is seen as part of the academic nature of an institution. But sometimes they do report more, sometimes to a presidential line, when they typically are more enrollment focused. Anyhow, every institution has a different structure, but the point I really want to make here is, if you're entering this profession, or as you're trying to navigate the profession in your career path, it's important to know what knowledge community, or where your front door will be, what area of specialization, if you want to have a specialization, will be, and then how you will advance in that career path. I hope that's clear. Now, this pathway is not without tension. Now, this is an area that creates considerable attention. But it is important for all of us to understand it. There are vertical movers, as I call them, people like me. When I was very young, I started out my career as an international educator. I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I worked my way through the career as an international educator. I got my master's degree in international education. I got my doctorate degree. I worked in progressively more responsible positions throughout my career, and so on. Those are vertical movers. But then we have horizontal movers. And these are professionals who typically come from adjacent careers, or in this case, as I've written on the screen there, tenured faculty positions, government roles, private sector jobs, and so on. And they're coming in horizontally. Now, the reason there's tension is typically those horizontal movers are coming in usually at the senior most roles. So they're coming in typically sometimes as an SIO, say from a tenured position into an SIO role at a university, or in some other capacity. And so you can imagine that tension. So you have these vertical movers who are really committing their career and they've developed competencies and expertise and other qualifications, and the horizontal people are coming above them. Now, whether I like it or not, this is still very, very present today across a lot of institutions, especially larger institutions. That said, I think that there has been a little bit more of a readiness to do searches for the senior most positions outside of the institution, meaning doing a national search to bring in an international educator. But on the other side of that is these people who are coming in from the faculty positions, for example, are really very important to international offices, especially if they're tenured, because they have the familiarity with academic and governance and faculty governance and so on. So that's really very important. So you really kind of need both as best as you can. But that said, if you're mid-career or later in your career joining today, this horizontal movement may be important for you to know, because sometimes you may be able to move in, but then you'll have a little bit of tension for people who have been working their career in a more vertical capacity. As I catch my breath, let me again invite all of you to feel free to jump into the chat. We have plenty of time today, and offer any questions that you have so that we can make sure that our time together is productive for you. So I want to then move on to talk about some of the current hiring trends right now in this space. The image on your screen there, Gateway, as some of you may know, we have a very active jobs board that active both for job seekers and employers, but it perhaps the reason why I believe it is the most comprehensive jobs board is that we have people who are working every day to make sure no reasonable job in international education that we know of or can find is not posted, meaning our jobs board is primarily free. Yes, an employer can feature a job and so forth on our jobs board, but anybody can post a job on our jobs boards for free. And I think, in fact, I'm pretty confident that there is no other jobs board in international education, at least in the United States, that is more comprehensive than the Gateway one. And because of that, we can argue a little generalizability about current trends. So there you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, and I also see my colleagues have posted a link in the chat. You can download this hiring trends annual report. We say it's an annual report, but it's really based on data from October to March this year. But next year, we will have a full 12 months of data that we'll be able to do some comparative analyses on. Anyhow, download that report, and you'll see a little bit more about some of the hiring trends, a lot more in detail and the narrative detail. But in a second, I'm going to show you a couple of slides from that report. But let me stop and also direct your attention. Even Gateway has positions available from time to time, including the open position that's noted right there. Anyhow, here are a couple slides from that annual report. As you can see, based on October to May, there were quite a few positions that were posted on our jobs board, both by us and by employers. And you can see that education abroad, as we might know, is doing well right now. A lot of institutions are seeing rebounds since the pandemic, and education abroad isn't yet being strongly or negatively impacted by some of the geopolitical issues that are happening right now. And so the hiring is strong. ISSS is right there with it. I think that may change a little bit in the near future, but right now ISSS positions are strong, and then you can see the breakdown there. This breakdown actually sort of represents the knowledge communities that I presented earlier by NAFSA and the proportion of people in those knowledge communities to a certain extent. But perhaps more importantly, as you'll see on the right side of the screen, almost a little over 50% of almost all of those jobs are entry-level positions. and only about 25% are mid-level. So that sort of reflects a little bit of that pyramid I was showing earlier. But nonetheless, keep that in mind as you're thinking about how you want to maneuver or navigate into this profession. Okay, let me pause here for a second and to tell you in a moment there will be a quiz. I'm not joking, there really is a quiz. I did prepare a quiz, so pay attention. I have 10 tips here I want to share with you. 10 tips that make sense for me, and hopefully if you have other tips that you want to share here, feel free to do that. Um, so my 10 tips for building a career in international education. First is to be very strategic about networking. Networking is so important. Remember I said this hiring in international education is very relational. And because of that, yes, you can successfully apply for jobs, but many times it's going to be very important to have to know people who know people, that you're networking, and there are many ways of networking. So I would encourage you to be very strategic about that. This has been a main driver for me over the course of my career and many others as well. One way of networking is conduct informational interviews, especially if you are, for example, a graduate student or you're considering to enter this profession for the first time. Think about conducting informational interviews. I give probably 5 informational interviews a week by people who are considering to enter the profession for the first time, hence leading up to today's webinar. But anyhow, these informational interviews, if you just get on a Zoom call with somebody for 20 to 30 minutes, you can learn a lot about particular questions that you have or particular aspects of the profession. They can get to know you a little bit, and that will build your network over time. Meanwhile, you're learning. And graduate students, if you or undergraduate students for that matter, if you identify as a student, most people, even the most senior people, will agree to meet with you, because I think our relationship, at least it's always been my experience, that is a really caring and supportive and nurturing group of professionals. And I think many of us would welcome you any request for informational interviews. And as I've said earlier, target your professional entry point. You don't have to pigeon yourself into one of the knowledge communities, but it is really going to be very important to think about where you want to be working. Most of us look at colleges and universities, but in fact, I've always thought if you really want to know education abroad, for example, work with a provider. You will learn so much so very quickly when working at a provider than you probably will in the same time period at a university. And why is that? Well, education abroad providers have to be forward thinking. They have to be innovative. They have to be fast. They have to be creative. And that's really sets them apart. I worked, as I said earlier, in my career at IES, and it was one of the best jobs I've ever had. I learned so much through IES that has continued to shape and inform my career to this day. So you don't always have to start at a university or college. The next thing I want to mention is be sure to develop your technical awareness. Remember, I mentioned earlier about shifting from generalist to specialist. That's really important nowadays, especially for even mid-career or senior professionals, that many of the jobs require a certain level of technical prowess that you may not have. Right now, obviously all of us need to understand better AI and its innovations, understanding the potential with various other types of ed tech. Immigration compliance right now is a huge thing within Gateway's clientele. Any of those technical things that you can learn, or those compliance or regulatory things that you can learn, definitely invest your time and energy on that. I'm even planning to enroll in a course on Coursera on AI because we have to. This is an industry. Higher education is about lifelong learning. But anyhow, develop that technical prowess. It'll help you. The fifth one is know the literature on international education. This is so important, especially for anybody who says, I have a master's degree. Well, if you have a master's degree, you really are considered to be a master or an expert. And that means knowing how the literature informs our practice. And in turn, how our practice shapes the scope and direction of our research. So it is going to be very important. I think it's incredibly important, rather, for all of us to be mindful of how literature informs or research informs our practice, because if you don't, it makes us look very hollow. So if you say, I think we should do it because this is my gut, that's very unconvincing to faculty members if you're trying to work with them, or it's certainly unconvincing to your provost or your president. Definitely have that research to back to support your practice. If you're not as familiar with some of the research in international education, I would invite you to look at Gateway Resources. There, on the Gateway Resources division of our company, we have a number of literature reviews as well as reading list. For example, I actually wrote the reading list for education abroad, and it's broken down in around 20 subcategories that tells you what are the seminal articles or books and so forth around particular areas of education abroad. Definitely know the literature. Okay, and let me do 5 more real quick. One is stay informed, not just of the literature, but also follow the trends, the policy shifts, the global developments. Policy in particular is important to me because more and more in countries around the world are creating international education policies, or they're updating their various policies. And that really impacts student flows, that impacts opportunities for university or institutional partnerships. It impacts how students are able to study away from particular countries or in particular countries. So definitely stay informed about the policy shifts or other types of trends and global developments that happen, because that really will inform how you're able to move forward every day. I would invite you to sign up for the Gateway Monthly newsletter, where we try to provide some updates on trends and the latest books, the latest news stories, and so forth that are happening in international education. And as I already said, embrace lifelong learning. We'll talk a little bit later, if you'd like, about whether or not you should have a PhD, but definitely it's always important to pursue different tiers of education, from graduate degrees to certificate programs and so on. And as I mentioned earlier, many of our associations are offer now expert certification in various areas of international education. And contribute to scholarship. So it's not just important for you to be familiar with and informed by scholarship, but we all have a role to contribute to that. So, try to publish, try to present your work at conferences and other platforms to engage in thought leadership. And by the way, publishing doesn't always have to mean publishing in a peer-reviewed journal. It can mean many other ways. In fact, Gateway has a blog. You can just promote your thinking there on a blog, or any other types of venues that you find to be able to contribute to that dialogue that's so important to all of us. And if you haven't already, and especially if you're relatively new to this profession, find a mentor. Find somebody that can help you, with whom you can seek guidance, insight, and access to various networks, people who will introduce you to other people. Find a mentor. And I can tell you, most senior international educators would love to be a mentor. So don't ever hesitate to ask them if they could provide a mentorship for you. I have had my mentors over the years, and in fact, Kathy being one of them, that have helped me shape and think through various things. And then my 10th tip is get involved. And that means try to engage professionally, try to volunteer, attend conferences. A colleague of mine, Kate Lamana, is developing a resource list that will soon be on the Gateway website about volunteer opportunities and other ways to be able to engage. Now, Kathy is signaling me here in the chat that we have several questions. So I'm going to pause and take some of those questions now, and then I'll turn to some of these resources. And the quiz, remember I mentioned there's a quiz. Kathy, what's our questions?
The first question is, I've increasingly noticed that some institutions are listing entry-level roles as assistant directors, at least in the admissions IEM space. As a mid-level professional who holds an assistant director title, this makes navigating advancement in the field more challenging. More challenging as experience, responsibilities, and pay do not align across similar titles. Do you have thoughts or recommendations on navigating through this as someone trying to advance and grow in the field?
That's a real important question, Kathy, and thank you to the person who submitted that question. It's a hard one too, because in many ways, because international education, I think in the eyes of some senior leaders, have yet to see us as a profession, and therefore a lot of us are not recognizing or seeing the salaries that are comparable to other similar positions across the industry. It is a challenge. That said, it is true many positions are entry level, but even the mid-career positions often require really advanced credentials. Like you have to have a master's degree, you have to have 10 years of experience, and the salaries are so modest for even those levels. It is hard. My advice to you is, yes, you do need to look at those jobs, but you really have to maintain that networking. Because sometimes the best jobs are not ones you apply for. They're the ones that somebody reaches out to you about. Yeah, and you just have to pay attention to that. In a moment, I'll talk to you a little bit about the job registry and how you can be notified about some of those mid-career and senior career positions. Kathy? Let's unmute you, Kathy.
I wanted to elaborate in my experience running searches and also as a hiring manager over 25 years. I want to encourage people to look at the institution as a whole and look at the breadth and the reputation and the sort of the strengths of the institution as well as the job itself. Sometimes interviewing for a job that isn't perfect for you will get you into an interesting conversation with the hiring manager, and they will remember you, or you will be able to leverage that whole experience into your next position interview. Or I would encourage you to look seriously and deeply at the ones you really care about and not hesitate to consider something, if not take it with a salary that doesn't bump you up or a title that doesn't bump you up. Just right now, with things the way they are, I think it's smart to get into the chair and have that conversation.
And Kathy, do you agree with me when I say about networking?
That can be a very scary thing to hear if you're starting out. So for entry-level people, I wouldn't be scared by that. Every relationship, every job, no matter if it's in and out of the field, is important. So don't hesitate to think of yourself as someone who's already networking. Just try to think about it, what you're already doing, and build on that. Don't be scared by that whole concept of networking and that you have to cold call 100 people to get a job. Just start with where you are.
And you can even network within your institution as well. At my previous institutions, I always encourage my team to at least have one meeting a day outside of the office, physically outside of the office. Okay, other questions, Kathy?
The next question is is there a certificate program that is recommended for mid-level professionals these days?
There are a number of certificate programs out there, and I think it comes back to that knowledge community. I know the Forum on Education Abroad has several certificate programs. I think NAFSA has a certificate program in various contexts. So there are many. I think the question there would be depending on what it is that you want. But I don't know that there are many broadly defined international education certificate programs that I'm aware of, but they typically are more specialist focused.
Okay, thank you. How important is a master's degree in advancing in this field?
A master's degree typically is really important, I think, especially here in the United States. Most jobs do require a master's degree or its equivalent. And typically its equivalent means 2 to 3 years of professional work experience. Now, the bigger question rather is about the PhD. So let's talk about that for a second. There has been, I see my friend and colleague Sarah Spencer's in the room here. Sarah and I were at a mid-career professionals network some 20 years ago, and that was the big question about, do I do a PhD or not? And now we're seeing more and more SIOs do have PhDs. PhDs often in higher education, educational policy, international education, in various related disciplines. The thing is, I do see more and more folks do have PhDs. Is it a requirement? No. Does it help open certain doors? Most certainly. Feel free to
Tony,
comment on that, Sarah. Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
there's a follow-up question from a different member of the audience saying, what recommendations do you have for career progression beyond the director level positions in international education leadership for those who do not hold a PhD?
Well, I think that's very important. Keep in mind, in that earlier slide, I talked about the ecosystem. Because if you're looking only at university-based positions, then sometimes that career progression becomes more obvious and more salient to the search, and certainly with terminal degrees. But when you're looking at other aspects of the ecosystem, degrees matter less, experience matters perhaps even more. So I would definitely think about what your progression is. In fact, I'm going to, since I've already invoked the name of Sarah Spencer, she I'll give you a QR code in a moment, but Gateway provides, through Sarah and others, professional coaching that will help folks to navigate their career path a little bit more clearly in a one-on-one session. So somebody like Sarah would be very helpful to you on that. But their career progression is important, and that said, however, you can get an SIO type of job without having a PhD, and that will vary at different types of institutions. Certainly larger, bigger public schools are almost always requiring PhDs these days. Kathy, what do you think about that?
I think you're right to broaden the spectrum and say that there's going to be a need for people, of course, to have that credential in certain places. But there are places that are looking for the right combination of experience, and go back to networking. If you've got the relationships, if you've worked at the university, if you're really good with data and tech, and you have all these other qualities, there's no obstacle to other kinds of leadership positions that are related to IE. It's just sometimes the road becomes narrow in these universities that can say they can require it. It's not always the best decision, but if they require it, there's nothing you can do. So you look beyond the narrow pathway of a big university. You'll see the job listings. You'll see it crop up more in certain universities where that credential is a reputational issue, and where they might have some kind of faculty status. They might only hire people who teach. You're just going to have to eliminate those and look more broadly at where are the other leadership positions in international admissions, in international enrollment management, in fundraising. And there's all kinds of ways that you can be an international educator without being on the academic affairs side.
Very good, very good. Kathy, let's take some more questions in
Yes.
a moment. But first,
okay.
let me give the quiz. I'm so excited about the quiz, and then I want to show a few more resources, and then we'll finish out with a bunch more questions. Okay, folks, true or false? Number one, because I studied abroad, I'm competitive for roles in international education. Kathy, what do you think?
I've never believed that.
Well,
it doesn't make you competitive by itself. It's what you do with it and how you.
I agree. It's false. I think a lot of times folks who feel like they've studied abroad, they want to get a job in an international office or an education abroad office in particular, and they often think that what their experience of studying abroad is similar to working in an education abroad office, and it really isn't. And folks who apply because they studied abroad oftentimes get a little disillusioned. So it is helpful to have studied abroad if you're working in that space, but I don't think it makes you as competitive as people like to think. Okay, number two, Kathy, you're on the spot here. Employers will care about my passion for global issues.
You're asking me to answer that?
Well, if you'd like.
Love to put someone else on the spot,
Oh,
but
you don't have to, but
I would use not the word passion, but my knowledge. I mean, it's impressive to meet someone who is very well informed and brings a lot of different perspective to a job. But in passion, no.
yeah, well, I think we're agreeing there. In my thinking of this question, I look at it a little differently. To read the question again, employers will care about my passion for global issues. Actually, what employers care about is the job they're hiring for.
Right.
So when I see this so often in employment interviews where the candidate's so eager to tell the employer about their international experiences or their international learning and forget to connect their knowledge and experience to what the employer really does care about, and that's the job they're trying to fill. So and then that's the same thing in your cover letters and in your resumes. Make sure you're tailoring that to each job you're applying for, because that's what employers are caring about. Does this person have the knowledge and experience and the wherewithal for this role? Number three, do you want to continue to be in the hot seat, Kathy? A
Sure.
graduate degree will significantly strengthen my candidacy.
I would say if it's required, it's essential. If it's not required, you will definitely get questions about it. But if you've done a degree in something, not like Tony, if you have done a degree not in international education, you should not think that that disqualifies you. A graduate degree in and of itself is an interesting part of your portfolio, and you should be prepared to talk about how it strengthens your candidacy.
Beautiful answer. And I put false here. And the reason I put false is that I oftentimes will speak with people who've recently finished their doctorate degrees here in the United States, and they have a doctorate degree, a master's degree, and so on, but they don't really have any international education experience. And so they think because they have worked so hard and truly have worked hard to earn that doctoral degree, that somehow it puts them at the top of the pyramid, and that just isn't the case. You still have to have those networks, the relationships, but also the knowledge and experience, ideally. So sometimes having a PhD can hurt you in a job pool if the job doesn't require anything related to advanced scholarship. Number four, Kathy, employers are generally not interested in my international travels.
That's true.
I think that is true. I agree. I think most of us are interested, but again, like number two, they really want to know whether or not you have the knowledge and experience for the job. They don't really care. And that's one of the things I often see for especially young professionals is you'll see on their resumes their education block where it says, I have a master's degree and a bachelor's degree and so on. Then there's this little section at the bottom that talks about travel and language. And there they're putting study abroad there. That stuff doesn't make sense to me. If you've studied abroad, employers don't want to know where you went. They want to know what you learned and what are you able to contribute to the job that they're trying to fill. So definitely make sure you're focusing on the right message in your resume about what it is that you are able to do. And so if someone ever asks you, say, for example, tell me about your education abroad experience, don't start your answer by saying, I went to X. They don't care. Number five, proficiency in other languages is usually a job requirement.
No.
Yeah, it's not generally. I think it perhaps was more and more, then it moved from required qualification to preferred qualifications. I do wish that it were still required in many cases, but in reality, if you do not speak a language other than your primary language, it may not necessarily hurt you. You agree on that, Kathy?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
We have a lot of questions, Tony.
Okay, so let me just do two quick slides of resources and I'll come to those questions because I think some of these resources are going to be very helpful to all of you. So this slide here is oriented around job seekers. So again, as I mentioned earlier, Gateway has a jobs board. The reason that it's to be honest, the jobs board of Gateways isn't all that technologically sophisticated, but it does have undoubtedly one of the most comprehensive listings of jobs in international education, and mostly because it's free. So definitely you want to look at that as much as you can. Now, we're all busy, and having and doing a job search is a full-time job in of itself. So Gateway has created, I think it's a very special thing called a job registry. You can go there, create a login and password, and fill out a profile. Now, truly, the profile takes a little bit of time, 15 minutes or so, but it creates then your own unique portal. If I logged in, I could show you, it just says, hello, Anthony. And then it lists the jobs that are related to the criteria that's important to me. And then once a week, it sends you an email message about those jobs. But more importantly, if you are a job seeker and you do not have a profile in the job registry, you really ought to set that up, because folks like Kathy and I, we frequently log in to the job registry and look for people that employers that have contacted us. So I will log in there and try to help them find people that are ideally qualified for the jobs that they're looking to fill. So definitely create that job registry. The third thing here is, as I mentioned earlier, Gateway does have extensive professional training and coaching services through my friends, Tim Yansa and Sarah Spencer and others. So you definitely want to look into those services. So here's some QR codes. Those web addresses there are also on your in your chat. Everything here, the first two things are all free, folks. So I'm not trying to sell you anything here. So definitely look at that. And if I may say, I believe for Sarah and Tim, the first 30 minutes of a professional coaching session is also free. So you definitely want to avail yourselves of that. Now, if you are an employer or you work for somebody currently that may need to know these services, Gateway does have a search firm. It's called Gateway Executive Search. Kathy is one of the leads on Gateway Executive Search. This is the only search firm that I know of in the world that focuses exclusively on searches in international higher education. Also, if you're an employer, we have a service called Gateway On Demand. And so if your team is fallen shorthanded and you need an extra set of hands, we have basically an on-demand staffing service. This is very popular among ISSS offices, but we do provide on-demand staffing for education abroad and IM. In fact, today I have 2 meetings for new clients for on-demand. And then again, let me reiterate the custom professional development training. There is so much changing right now. It's hard to keep up. Like, for example, the changes to duration of status require extensive training. So if you and your team need some training on, for example, duration of status, let us know, because we could do custom training. Now, Kathy, with that, let's go to some of your questions.
Well, we have 7 questions that are out there, and I don't know if we'll get to them all, but I wanted to see if I could group them together. We have a question from one of our attendees is from Ghana and has no experience with higher ed. And so she's looking at how do I deliberately, planfully develop my competitiveness in international opportunities. My answer to her is really quite simple. Start where you are and become someone who is involved with the coming and going of students where you are, or faculty or scholars or funding. It's really could be in international development, it could be in schools, it could be in international higher ed. But then again, you get into this credentialing issue, the higher up you want to go. And then I think people look seriously at people coming from abroad. I've seen in searches them being taken quite seriously. Not always understanding the importance of what they've done abroad. So the search firm has always helped the universities to understand how hard this work is in country as well. It's very important work. So that, I think, would be my answer. Unless you have any comments, Tony, I'll move to the next one.
Yeah.
The next one is for you, Tony. What are any particular that you can think of? Any particular studies or resources that you would point one of our members to, one of our attendees would like to know if you have any specific recommendation on studies in the field that you would start with?
Well, I mentioned earlier those foundational reading lists on our website. Jonathan, if you're listening, would you put the link to that Gateway Resources page in the chat for this viewer. The that foundational reading list, there are several of them. They would be very helpful place to start to understand international education. There are also broad, large books available as well. And if you go through the Gateway website, you'll see we try our best to list every publication that's come out. And so it's kind of a quirky web page, unfortunately, but it lists a bunch of books, and you have to hit load more constantly, but you'll see a ton of books there, and each of those books are hyperlinked to wherever the book is being sold. So you definitely want to look at some of those, but start with those foundational reading lists. But also, you might even ask, if you're setting up some of those informational interviews, maybe that would be the final question you'd ask each person you speak with, say, is there one thing I should read this week? And see what they say.
My only comment to that, Tony, is to add that I would start with what interests you, because it's much more, it's easier to talk about things that you're already interested in, and there's such a huge list on the website. The next question is, what specializations do you think will grow? He's a recent grad in an entry, he or she, I'm sorry, I don't know, recent grad here in an entry-level enrollment position of various specializations. Which do you see growing or shrinking in the future?
Well, that's a really powerful question, isn't it? I always joke with my colleagues saying what I do today is different than what I did 5 years ago, and will be different again 5 years from now. Because I think international education in this country and elsewhere is constantly shifting. So it is important to constantly be evolving with some of the changes. I definitely think in the next couple of years here in the United States, one area of expertise will be anything to do with partnerships and collaborations, anything to do with transnational education. Because in many ways, and I often hear universities right now are feeling like, well, because of politics being what they are, we can't bring students here, so let's go and educate them there. And so we need greater expertise in that. I'm also seeing folks who are in high demand, who have any knowledge, a regulatory compliance knowledge, any legal knowledge about international higher education are in demand. And then certainly anything related to technology, AI, any of that will be huge going forward. There's just no way around it. And so those are the three big trends. And I would say ask others the same question, because it's as you're beginning your career, understanding how to develop particular areas of expertise will be really powerful for you. Definitely focus on those three, or at least pay attention to those three.
So, Tony, the last three questions are all related to degrees. I'm gonna summarize them and let you take them, because you only have a few minutes left.
Okay.
The first question, and let me get through all three. The first question is, which degree has the most cachet or value? And there's a list of all the degrees: PhD, EDD, MPA, MBA, et cetera, terminal degrees in general. So one is about which degree one should go for. Another question comes from someone who's currently earning an EDD and feels like they're overqualified given their current role as Director of International Admission. And it is hard to be getting this degree and then feel like I'm overqualified for the position on the market. And so people want more experience, management experience, and they're not looking at the degree as much. Any advice for this person? The third one is someone who had to discontinue their degree at SIT in the middle of it and then was told that maybe IE isn't the right thing to study. And do you have any experience with this? The degree was postponed, the program was postponed. And can you speak of the longevity of the field as a whole? That's a big one.
These are all important questions and big questions that we don't have enough time to truly treat here. Just maybe some short questions, short responses. By the way, I did go to SIT. That's where I earned my master's degree, and I very highly valued that degree. One thing about terminal degrees, I've always thought you should never do a terminal degree to get a job. You should do a terminal degree because you want to develop yourself as a scholar or as a scholar practitioner in whatever chosen discipline. I think that, to me, I loved I truly love doing my doctoral studies. In fact, I would do it again because for me, I always saw it as an opportunity for me to invest in my own knowledge, in my own learning. And for me, that was the number one driver. I don't know that pursuing a PhD just to get a driver's license is enough motivation. But don't stop. You're getting an EDD. Contribute to the research and the scholarship in international admissions. Contribute to your colleagues in their learning. Enjoy that process. But definitely, I would say a master's degree, at least in the United States, is almost becoming a requirement for most jobs, even entry-level jobs. And also, again, keep in mind about lifelong learning because to the earlier question, again, what we're going to be doing in 5 years or 10 years from now will be very different. So we constantly have to mature and to develop. So Kathy, I think unless there's any pressing questions, we're 2 minutes over. Are you okay?
Okay.
Okay, well, with that, folks, I know we've covered a lot, and honestly, we could spend many hours talking about all of this. And maybe just by conclusion, I just want to say I am just one person's perspective, okay? And so you definitely want to talk to a lot of different people, and as you're navigating your career, there are wonderful people. As we've gone through some of the slides here currently on the slide, these are some colleagues of mine within Gateway. These are all seasoned international education leaders. And I'd recommend you to reach out to them and any others that you may know to continue to build and familiarize yourself with this space. There on the screen is my email. So if you have questions that you'd like to continue to follow up with me, I welcome it. I'm here for you. And I want to thank you as well for joining me today and expressing your interest in advancing collectively our profession, international higher education. And thank you to my colleague, Dr. Kathy Winnie, for helping to keep me honest today, and to Jonathan Offarth and others within the Gateway community. Everybody, I wish you a terrific afternoon and week ahead.